A few weeks ago, I reviewed the new Shang-Chi card and talked about it in terms like strongest card in the game. They have relegated it to the level of pre-release Isan. It is no longer so terrifying. Let's take a look at all the changes to upcoming cards they introduced in this latest patch. Now, for those who didn't catch that video, the new Shang-Chi is scheduled to release in the January season at 3-5. At the beginning of the game, you add the 10 rings to your hand when you play Shang-Chi. On reveal, upgrade their potential. Now, the previous 10 rings had such an incredible amount of power in them, all in the unupgraded version. What they said was at 2-0, they would, end of turn, give something else at that location +1 power. When you upgraded them, they gave everything at the location +1 power. The reason this was so powerful was because that is a free activator for things like Sebastian Shaw, for things like Clea, for things like Spider-Man or Superior Spider-Man. All of these cards and all of these decks, really, that are gated by not having consistent activations on their cards or having to play bad cards in order to activate them. This card solves that by giving you an activator for those cards that starts in the opening hand and repeatedly activates those cards as long as it's in the same lane as them. Also, pretty good value on that activator. It's a 2-5 effectively. There's just a ton going on with the old design of Shang-Chi, so they changed what the base rings does and added a power to the rings. And you might be saying, Cam, well, okay, get to the part where you actually talk about what they did, because it sounds like they just made it stronger. Don't worry. They absolutely obliterated the base rings. Yeah, okay, it's a 2-1, and the upgraded rings are a 2-2, and all of that. But the base rings, the card that started in your hand, now instead of being end of turn repeatable value, is just an on reveal, which is, I think, much better balance. Because, I mean, I guess it obviously is, because I thought this card was like the strongest card that ever made. It was somewhere between old Sam Wilson and old Isan. For those who don't remember old Isan, Isan's original data mine was, I would argue, the fakest thing I've ever seen in my entire life, but it had him as a start of game. If all of the cards in your deck have different power, give them all +2 power, which is effectively a 0-14 or something to that effect, depending on how many cards you think you're reasonably playing per game. Just a really, really, really dumb card that would have gotten nerfed, deleted. They never were going to release it, is my best guess on that, because it's just basically impossible for that to ever get through any kind of quality check. This is a card that I thought was in a similar space, where it's like, the fundamental thing this card does is not necessarily the most offensive thing in the world. But when you think about what this saying end of turn means, it means that all of these cards that typically you have to go out of your way to get the value out of, just get that value for free. And it means that there's no real, like, put A plus B together. Sometimes when you play a deck that's based on synergy, you don't get all of your synergies all the time. You have your Frigga in hand, and you don't draw your V hand. You have to do something else with the Frigga. You have your V hand in hand, you don't have enough cards that you actually use to create other cards, and it doesn't really do much. The issue with Shang-Chi is this card starts in your hand, and so it would always be on. Your Clea would always be repeatedly generating those things. That would be 100% of games. I think a lot of the time people talk about things like they're 100% likely to happen. Nothing really is in a card game except the card that starts in your opening hand. That's pretty close to 100% likely to happen. Obviously, you could get, like, it discarded by a location or something. You know what I mean, though? Like, this card no longer being starts in hand repeatable value means that we have to fully throw out all my evaluations of Shang-Chi. And part of the reason I wanted to do this video is because I think it also means I have to fully throw out a lot of my evaluations of a card like Maverick. Maverick is going to have to stand a lot on his own now. When I was evaluating Maverick, I was using, like, okay, this is like the greatest old Shang-Chi card ever. Like, this version of that Maverick with the rings, it's just going to be stacking up power the entire game. It's going to be completely bonkers. It's going to be the coolest thing ever. My Maverick is going to make my broods, 8 power each. It's going to be ridiculous. That kind of thing is no longer on the table for Maverick, which means that if you're thinking about buying Maverick, you have to think a lot more short term. Like, usually there are cards that have to stand on their own immediately. Sometimes there are cards like that. Another card that this impacts is Superior Spider-Man, which is a card that I think was going to get better and is in the process of people realizing that he's a better card. But the loss of a permanent activator for him, that's a problem, because the way this old rings worked with Superior Spider-Man is even if you didn't have a target on turn 1, you'd play the rings on 2, Superior Spider-Man in the same lane on 3, the rings would end of turn buff the Superior Spider-Man, you'd start turn 4 with 5 energy, it would be absolutely free. That is no longer happening because they are an on reveal. This is not a card that you're just playing to play it anymore. This is a card that you are playing to upgrade with Shang-Chi into the good version of the card. Which is this, by the way, which is still super busted, right? Like, it is still really, really strong when you draw and play Shang-Chi to upgrade the rings. Super want to be clear on that. When you're doing that, it's still that free activator, but at least now you have to draw Shang-Chi to access most of the power of this card. With the previous formulation of this card, it was giving you all that free value, and then Shang-Chi himself is a sweetener. This version of the card, the rings are kind of bad until you draw and play Shang-Chi and upgrade the rings, and then they are really good, which is probably a more satisfying play pattern, but more importantly, it does mean that they didn't make sort of new Sam Wilson in the sense that it's free value even when you don't play the card. It's just there doing good things for you. That is a lesson that I think probably informs this change to Shang-Chi. I'm really glad they did this, but I do think that it impacts the evaluation of the card that came out today, which is Maverick, because if there's a card that's as good with a card like Maverick coming out in the future, that matters when you're making a purchasing decision, I think. And it's a good reminder that data mines are not always permanent, and I think that's probably a thing worth keeping in mind. Shang-Chi, I still think, is a really interesting, potentially really powerful card, but he is no longer a card that I have earmarked as, not only is this a mistake, it is super busted. And that's probably a good thing, but it does make my job a little bit harder because now I have to actually think about this guy. Another massive change to a January card, and frankly, it's a January card that people were already excited for. Shou-Lao used to be a 5/10 that gave +2 for each turn you've played more than 2 cards on, or 2 or more cards, I should say. This is now a card that is a little weaker in body, but a lot stronger in power, a 5/8 that is giving +3 for each turn on which that is true. I think this is likely a mild, like a couple of points buff to a good Shou-Lao deck. Like, obviously, like, you need at least 2 turns in order to make up the difference, typically, is how you'd look at that, going from 5/8 +3 to 5/10 +2. But every turn after 2, you're netting 1. So if you're getting, like, 4 Shou-Lao procs or 4 procs of Shou-Lao, this is suddenly like a better value card by 2 points, 5 procs of Shou-Lao, which I would imagine is pretty close to the maximum, if not the maximum. You're going to be netting 3 points over the old design. This is a card that I view as a very powerful card, or I already viewed it as a very powerful card. And I think it's indicative of what it takes for a 5-drop to be successful in the modern era of Marvel Snap, that this is just kind of like, when you compare it to something like Gilgamesh, what it does well is it splits its power, it goes in more decks, right? Like, that's the biggest difference between this and a Gilgamesh. When you compare it to something like Darkhawk or Ronin, I think then the comparison gets a little bit more stringent because it's probably going to be doing more power than those cards. Like this, I think you could reasonably look at and say this is 23 power, this is 20 power, this is a bunch of power, it's split across multiple locations, this is closer to Zombie Giant Man in terms of output than it is a lot of the other things, but it's probably a little bit easier than Zombie Giant Man in terms of what it's asking, but it probably has less great support than Zombie Giant Man does, because Zombie Giant Man obviously also kind of gets to be split across 2 locations in weird and different ways, and frankly, I don't know if there's a card that's as good for Shou-Lao as Zombie Scarlet Witch is for Zombie Giant Man. Just kind of hard to compare an open-ended card like this to a very closed-ended card like Zombie Giant Man. This is a long way of saying that this card has a very reasonable chance to be the strongest 5-cost card in the game. Now, it is pretty contextually driven, but it's contextually driven in a way that I really enjoy. I think this card pushes me towards Kitty Pryde. It pushes me towards Merlin. It pushes me towards Prowler. It pushes me towards Kate Bishop. It pushes me towards Thanos. It pushes me towards all of these cards that are cool. It pushes me towards playing off curve with one drops. It pushes me towards all of those kind of more dynamic games of Marvel Snap, where I think this is a really cool card. What it isn't, though, is big enough to beat a combo deck. And this is where the Zombie Giant Man comparison comes in, where it's like, this is a great mid-rangey build around whose viability will largely be determined by whether or not the deck that plays this card will be able to play the important interactive pieces that keep mid-rangey decks in the game against decks that are just doing, you're playing a 5/23 or whatever with your Shou-Lao. That's your whole deck, right? Then you play that against something that is doing, Living Tribunal or whatever, right? Like, just like, oh, okay, my bad. Mr. Negative, oh, okay, my bad. Right? Oh, yeah, you played a 5/23, you played a 0/75. Like, that kind of stuff is probably what's going to determine what this card's viability is. But I would imagine that it's strong enough, like, if you take a look at the Annihilus-y mid-range decks right now, I think this card could replace that package as a points package. Like, I think that kind of mid-range with a 4/5 and some interaction, that kind of thing is what Shou-Lao should succeed in. These sort of Merlin-y, Wolfy, mid-range decks. This is just a really big guy to go in them. I think he's going to be pretty exciting. Also, a couple of new cards dropped from seemingly the February season. Drax, Avatar of Life, end of turn, +4 power. If your opponent played a card with greater power this turn, move to that card if you'd be winning this location. The thing that sticks out to me about this card is that since it's an end of turn, the interesting thing about it is that many of the problems that a zombie Captain Marvel had, given activate timing, and I don't know how many people got super into zombie Captain Marvel, but the biggest issue that card had is that it moved when it checked when you activated it, right? So if you didn't have priority, that was good. It would then move to a location you were actually losing. But if you did have priority, and you would end up losing a location to your opponent's unrevealed cards, you just wouldn't see that. This card being end of turn, I think is pretty interesting. I also like that it's decoupled from the specifics of, like, okay, it's decoupled from the gain power and the move. Those are two different clauses. I think that's nice too. Like, let's say there's a location that you would be winning with this card. That's a pretty interesting thing to do. What I'm worried about here is that we've got another, like, this one is closer to actual Captain Marvel by virtue of being an end of turn. It is about like 66% of the way there. What does it do if you're already winning a location? That is the biggest thing that comes to mind here, because this is not the first almost a Captain Marvel they've made. What does it do if you're already winning a location? Because I really do think, okay, I play this on 4. The problem I'm running into is the end of turn also helps here, because, like, you play it on 4. Normally, if this wasn't an end of turn, you'd be like, oh man, I really, I need priority to make this work. The end of turn stuff, taking priority out of it, means it is, like, that much better than Zombie Captain Marvel in a real way, because during the game, it's just, they played a 4/7. Okay, cool. This guy's going to 4/8. Oh, they played a 5/9 or whatever, right? Like, if you're playing against, I'm imagining a Scream deck, right? You play this on 4, they play a Stegron, they play an Arrow. You see what I'm saying, right? Like, that kind of stuff. It'll be a big guy. It'll be a really big guy. And I think it being end of turn is a big leap forward in terms of pseudo Captain Marvel-y stuff like this. It really irons out a lot of the things that, when I think about a card that does this as a reaction to an opponent's play, like when they do something, I move to it. That's way worse than this end of turn thing. The only real worry I have about this as a sort of bigger Captain Marvel is I am worried that this card might not be enough to, or might have bad interactions with locations I'm already winning. I hope the way it's worded suggests if you would be winning this location, meaning this will only go there if it wins the location. I hope that's how it works, because if so, I think this card is pretty exciting and pretty cool and pretty interesting. And the end of turn part of it does a ton of work for how you have to think about specific situations with this card. If this card doesn't move to locations that you're already winning, I think it could legitimately be a pretty good card. The only issue I see with it is we aren't really in a play a Stegron and Arrow metagame. It's just still a mid-rangey stats guy. And so while I think this card is interesting and cool, I worry it could just be not called for at various times. Another new card is Starhawk, a card that I had to reread multiple times because it's worded in a weird way, or maybe I'm just an idiot. On reveal, on odd turns, give your cards at the left location +1 power. On even turns, give your cards at the right location +1 power. With the nerf to Shang-Chi's rings, I kind of think this guy is a more important piece of whatever deck is doing that kind of thing than you would otherwise think. I think that this guy probably had no way of being a realistic piece of any decks when Shang-Chi's rings was an end of turn ability. With Shang-Chi's rings going to an on-reveal ability, it is no longer permanently activating whatever card you have that scales off of getting additional power, Shaw, Clea, we talked about all that stuff, and is instead not doing that, which means you need to put actual cards in your deck that do that instead of just free-rolling the effects of those cards. Which means Starhawk is actually like a pretty interesting activator, because I don't think he's amazing. And this conversation is, in my opinion, pretty revelatory with regards to why old Shang-Chi was such a problem. When you think about what we actually have to give power to cards like this, it's really not a lot. And so just having a card that's like, your cards that do stuff like this get some extra power. Oh, your Maverick has 4 now. Oh, here's a bunch of cool stuff. Yeah, look at all this cool stuff we can do. Oh, we've done a bunch of cool stuff. Yeah, guys, Shaw, all that. Awesome. Great, right. There is getting to be potentially a critical mass of cards that you're just like very happy to get a proc off of. And I think that Starhawk is actually pretty reasonably going to be able to do that. What's confusing about me, though, is he looks like he should be like a repeatable effect. Like he's not. He's an on reveal. And I realize that this might be a confusion that is like limited specifically to me, but it does sort of feel like, oh, there's like, when I look at this, what I wonder is like, did they take the end of turn off of Shang-Chi and then also take the end of turn off of this? I wonder that, because like the way it's worded, it's just like, it kind of feels like it's supposed to be doing like, boop, 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 boop. But that's probably like a really broken card, right? That you probably can't make that at 2 anyway. So I don't really know, but like I do like look at that and I'm like, this guy probably has a lot more room to exist now that Shang-Chi's rings is not this oppressively powerful force. But I do think that it's possible that this guy ends up being a pretty reasonable supporting piece rather than a, build around a monster, the way I evaluated a lot of the other stuff. This is just like a good activator for various boost synergies, I think. I was worried when I made my video on the data mines of the February season, because one of the first comments on that video was like, why didn't she just wait until Tuesday for the patch? And the answer for that is, I kind of forgot it was happening. I don't know what you want from me, but I none of the cards that I talked about in that video seem to be any different in the new patch. So the guy who was like, oh, why don't you just wait for the patch and then we'll have more information? I will give you this. I think Starhawk's in this season, and there is one other card that seems to be in this season. And I don't want to overstate this. It might be the greatest card ever made. Major victory. It's Agent Coulson, but for Guardians of the Galaxy. I have nothing bad to say about this card. Banger design. Coolest thing they've ever done. They better not ask me to pay money for it, but it is really cool if you want to give it out in a grand arena or whatever. Like, yeah, that's great. I'm super into this card. It's so sick. I do think it's sort of sad in a way that I won't be able to play this at Arisham the way I want to. I think it's sad in another way that Victoria Hand is such the defining card for these kinds of decks that focus around created cards, and she really doesn't want that much for you to be making big guys with it. I don't know exactly what the Guardians crew entails. I'm going to go out on a limb and guess it's the Series 1 Guardians, but maybe like Star-Lord Master of the Sun counts. I don't really know. Maybe Rocket and Groot counts. I don't really know, but I'm guessing it's just like the Rocket up to Gamora scale. Like that's kind of what I'm guessing. And I think you probably really don't want to get things like Drax in that situation. This card is a card that is cool and interesting, and I like it, but I worry that the space it exists in, i.e. Victoria Hand, doesn't want you to play things that give you like a Gamora. It wants you to play things that are smaller and have more ability to carry the Victoria Hand buff, because the more things you can hit with a Victoria Hand buff, the better the card Victoria Hand is. And so that's really my only worry for this card. I guess there's a secondary worry, which is, you remember when we could play Agent Coulson on 2 and Arashim? God, I wish we could do that with this guy. God, I wish we could do that with this guy, but we can't, I fear. This would be such a cool Arashim card if it costs 2. It, of course, does not. This is my official pitch to Second Dinner. Please make this card a 2/2, I beg of you. All right, y'all. Thank you so much for watching. As always, I've been KMBest. You've been phenomenal, and let's get a collective thank God they nerfed that Shang-Chi card. Whew. I am glad I do not have to deal with that guy. But when we're talking about Maverick in tomorrow's video, we are going to mention that it is no longer a guaranteed part of what seems to be a guaranteed extremely strong deck. Once Shang-Chi comes out, it still might be good, but things are a lot more up in the air for our boy, Big Mav. Thanks so much. Remember to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.